Here's a bonus video while I do my Forgotten Realms to Mystara conversions. I know I tell people to switch out the obvious choices, but for people new to Mystara, those monsters might not be that obvious. I picked a number of monsters that tend to be found in the Forgotten Realms, but either never made an appearance in Mystara, had an obvious replacement, or there was a creature that had a similar motivation that worked just as well. In several cases, multiple creatures could work depending on the situation. But enough talking about it. I'm Mr. Welch, and let's get to it. I'm not going to talk in detail about the very obvious swaps. Tabaxi and Rakasta are different creatures with different motivations and backgrounds, but they're still both cat people. A Luxodon and a Pachydermian are elephant creatures, though there are different rules, and there is a large size difference between the two. Sharkkin and Sahuagin are both aggressive shark-type humanoids, so it's an easy swap there. You will have to modify a few creatures because the Mystaran version has a much different motive or background than the Faerun version. Gnolls, for example, go from mindless reavers to conquerors that are slightly touched in the head. Mystaran gnolls are the result of a mad wizard, and Faerun gnolls are demonic in origin. It does require a slight amount of rewrites. First up is a couple of easy substitutions in the vein of similar methods and motivation with the Grick and the Grell. The Grell likes to hover and attack with its numerous tentacles, so does the Decapus. While the Decapus lacks poison, it also makes up for it by having a tremendous amount of attacks with more tentacles. You can easily switch them out with no difficulty. Then you get to the Grell, which is an ambush worm thingy, which is something Mystara does better than anybody. You've got the Fersnaka, the red worms, the boneless, and a couple more. You're spoiled for choice with the variety that you can mix and match depending on the location. That takes care of the easy ones. Now let's get on to the hardest ones. The most obvious creature that has to be removed is the Drow, because our underground elves, of course, are the shadow elves, but aside from that, they share little in common with the Drow. The problem is Drow are normally supposed to be found underground. In Greyhawk, they're more like boogeymen than just any other elf. In Forgotten Realms, it has them traipsing above and below with little regard for their background. We need creatures that are debauched, cruel, manipulative, and utterly evil. Oh, and preferably subterranean if possible, though after reading Dungeon Heist, that's not much of a requirement anymore. For the above ground, I suggest Unseelie She. Not she like you just like to mess with mortals. I'm talking about the ones that work for the worst of the Unseelie Archfey. Jack and Irons, Genie Greenteeth, Lantern Man, or other followers of evil Fey. They're capricious, vindictive, and unpredictable. They will flay the party alive because they think their screams are musical. The Fey have a much larger presence in Mystara than Faerun, and because of their normal appearance they can pass for humans or elves without much effort, until they decide it's time for torture. Below ground, there isn't much of a substitution choice for Drow, largely because of the limited room the world below represents. The two largest settlements in the world below are the City of Stars and the Orc City of Oinkmar, and even those are restricted by their size. If you have to use an organized humanoid species underground to represent the Drow, in most cases you can use Thar's Legion. They are quite varied, but they do have a motivation. They aren't evil for evil's sake, they are usually following orders. In rare circumstances, the Shotten Elfen are a possibility, but remember, they are exceptionally rare outside the Hollow World, and they are only known to have lived near the northern reaches on the surface. Their biggest problem is that sunlight burns them like vampires, and Ixion doesn't care if they are out at night. Moonlight burns them just as well. So if you do run Shotten Elfen, don't take them above ground. Just use them largely for adventures far below ground. For Dwergar, there isn't a specific evil dwarven race that works. Mystara has three subraces of dwarves. Kogalar are the previous dwarven race that were preserved in the Hollow World after the Great Rain of Fire because they lack the dwarven resistance to radiation. They're good-natured and quite friendly. That's not a good replacement for Dwergar. The Rot Dwarves, or Modrigswer, are as evil as can be, but they are very individualistic, and they are all cursed and insane. They cannot leave the region they live in, or they get sick and die very quickly, so they aren't a good substitute. The Rockborn are the most numerous, and most of them are good in alignment. Granted, I said most. There is a faction in Clan Borodar that is led by the clan leaders Durik and Bifia that want to overthrow King Everast and put themselves on the throne. This is high treason without question, so the dwarves have to build up their strength away from Rockholm. The Dwergar are now treasonous followers of Clan Borodar, building up power and weapons away from the eyes of their countrymen. Myconids don't fit in Mystara, again because the large underground space that they would normally live in isn't there. To replace them, you need something inhuman, mysterious, and difficult to comprehend. Fortunately, Mystara has the perfect substitute in the Geonid. They are small creatures that live in either hollowed-out rocks or have a shell that resembles rock so closely it's impossible to tell the difference. They don't relate well to other races. They're primitive, but they have a fully developed society that only they can seem to understand. It's hard to tell them apart, and because they're isolationists, you aren't going to run across them normally unless you're in their lands. They fill all the roles the Myconids normally fill, even if you are switching out mushrooms for stones. Deep gnomes don't have much of a Mystaran equivalent. To find a replacement, you need a creature that is rare, shy, and good-natured. Replace all the surface Sverfneblin with just regular forest gnomes, as above-ground gnomes are either on the ground or in the sky, and flying deep gnomes are a contradiction. Geonids were my first idea for a substitution, but they have too much of an alien mindset to be a good choice. Then I had an idea. Keep with the motivation, but ignore the actual creature. The one creature that tends to be rare, shy, and good-natured in Mystara are the polymorphs. They're a race of shapeshifters that can assume various humanoid forms, but they stick to themselves. They serve the function as an isolated, good-natured communal creature like a deep gnome, but instead of just being gray-skinned, bald gnomes, they're just as mysterious by appearing as various creatures when the party meets them. And then the party finds it's impossible to keep track of polymorphs because they change forms like we change clothes. Just remember the polymorphs find other creatures equally strange because those creatures can't shape change. Yuan-Ti are one of the races that WotC just loves because there's just so many versions of them. The issue you have with them putting them in Mystara is we have lizardmen, gatormen, caymen, chameleon men, and cysthic. We're a bit full up on reptilian races, but that gives you a huge selection of creatures you can replace them with. You don't have to stick with reptilian races if it mimics the motivations of the Yuan-Ti either. If you want races that are trying to conquer unsuspecting races, the Aranea are a perfect match, especially when you add the shape-changing ones from the Savage Coast. The spider folk experimented heavily on the lizardmen of the region, so the more exotic and brutal Yuan-Ti forms can easily just be the experiments created by the various wizards of the Aranea. When it comes to replacing bullywugs, it's a bit harder. Bullywugs have the problem with their defining trait is they're insane. If it wasn't for that fact, you could just change them out with caymen and call it a day. Problem is, caymen, while far too cocky for their own good, they aren't crazy. If you need a race that's just plain bonkers and hostile to everybody, that's the Mystaran Knoll right there. But the best replacement is the Karakara, or the Sea Orcs, for lack of a better term. They aren't insane, but their religion and their culture is so alien to others they might as well be. They also live in the same terrain as bullywugs, so that's a major plus. Aarakocra fall into the same problem we have with the Yuan-Ti. Mystara already has multiple creatures that fill the same role. Do you need a flying creature for your campaign? The Flayers from Top Ballista are an established race, and numerous enough to be considered at least uncommon. The biggest change is that the Flayers don't visit large cities very often, preferring to stay in the mountains or on Serene. Aside from that, they are a seamless replacement for the Aarakocra. Mind Flayers are a bit of a problem because Mystara doesn't do the whole hidden race trying to suck everybody's brains out shtick. Mind Flayers are supposed to be extraplanar creatures, but in Mystara they tend to be hiding out in most major towns and more than a few dungeons. There's multiple replacements for them depending on need. Like the Yuan-Ti, the Aranea can replace the Illithid in certain situations. Kopru are also mind-controlling conquerors, but the problem is they don't have the numbers like the Illithid do. Baldendars are almost the lost soulmate for Illithids in terms of motivations and method. The one problem is Baldenar are notoriously solitary creatures. They have a love of control and believe everyone else is chattel, just like the Illithid. They're perfect if you need a single Illithid, but you're going to have to explain multiples of them. For mass numbers, try the Hive Brood. They are more like a fantasy Borg, but if you need a large number of creatures dragging people back for food or body conversion, they fill the role perfectly. Illithids have multiple possible substitutions, but you need to find the replacement based on the role the Mind Flayer is occupying in the adventure. There's not a single good replacement for these guys. Aboleths are big nasties in Faerun, but their story in Mystara was already told by the Kopru. World-controlling masterminds overthrown and cast down from their position of power? Yeah, Kopru have already been there and done that. While the Kopru is a bit weaker in power than a normal Aboleth, it's not by much. If you need a higher difficulty to match an Aboleth, remember that unlike Aboleth, Kopru will work in groups. They live in the same environments, they have the same motives, and the same methods. This was one of the easier replacements. Those are all the major races that were specific to Faerun that I could find, and by extension Greyhawk for the most part. Despite what a lot of people say about the 5th edition books, there needs to be some difference in the ecologies of the different settings. Variation makes a setting feel unique. You don't want every setting to be a generic kitchen sink where nothing makes it unique. Trust me, you don't want Dark Sun or Ravenloft monsters running around other settings unless you really hate your players. Crossovers need to keep a sense of wonder about them. A race that's common in one setting can be mysterious and hunted on another. Mystara doesn't do extraplanar creatures very often as a plot point. Illithid would be met with extreme force, as immortals would send quests to their various candidates for immortality to remove the trespasser. Chances are no one in Specularum knows what a tiefling looks like, assuming you're talking about the demon-spawn tieflings that are supposed to be rare across Faerun, but still appear multiple times in pretty much every town, adventure, and dungeon. Of course, if you're talking about the Dirtalizi tieflings that all have a unique appearance and hail from Sigil, then at least they have an excuse for being in Mystara. Granted, that's a very good idea for a crossover because you are combining the two major aspects of two very unique settings, where Sigil is a door to everywhere and Mystara has a large number of tourist attractions. As far as I know of, Mystara is the only major D&D setting with an actual tourism industry. I'm not saying don't introduce outside creatures to Mystara, I'm just saying make it a special adventure. If Illithids show up, the party gets sent with a small army of Magan designed to resist the psychic attacks to stop them. A plain-hopping Glantrian mage could accidentally unleash a small horde of bullywugs into the Glantry city sewers and the party has to clear them out. An Aboleth could escape from a portal to the elemental plane of water into Irendi, and the resulting war between the Aboleth and the Co-Pru would require the party to hunt down both sides and end it. However, if you want to keep a setting entertaining, you need to keep it unique. That's why Mystara had its own monster manual, just like Greyhawk had its own, and Darksun and Ravenloft. Hell, Mystara even had multiple monster manuals depending on what part of the setting you were in. That's what made the Savage Coast feel so different from the known world. So keep Mystara unique. You don't need to make it just another pale imitation of Faerun. Mystaran monsters make Mystara Mystara.